Welcome to the Pool Genius Circa Survivor Week 13 show. You may know it as Thanksgiving week, East week. And in Circa Survivor, that means two picks. It's the week that everybody looks and tries to get to. It kind of means it's a breaking point in the contest where you know things are for real if you've made it to the Thanksgiving set of picks. And so we're going to go through this week, both the Week 13A or Thanksgiving games, the 4 games on the Thanksgiving and Black Friday schedule. Everybody in the contest has to make one pick from among those 4 games. And then if you advance, you still have to make another pick from the other 12 on Saturday or on Sunday and Monday. And so we'll also go through those Week 13B is what they call it. Week 13B games. Make sure you're on top of getting your picks in. The deadline for the Thanksgiving games is by Wednesday night. So you want to get those in by Wednesday night before the Thanksgiving games. And then you had your regular deadline for the Sunday games. But you won't know the results and who's still alive until that Philadelphia-Chicago game ends on Friday. So in this episode, I'm going to go through both of those, like I said. But before we do that, I'm going to kind of take a step back. And we're going to take a big overview of the contest, how we got to this point, how things are shaping up, because I do think it plays into what happens from this point forward, how people play out these holiday set of games. But before we get into that quick overview of the contest, if you do enjoy this content, make sure you hit like and subscribe and on the Circa show and our others. It helps us know what you're interested in. It helps, know what content we should be providing to you. So we really appreciate that. And now let's get to the Circa 2005 season overview up until Thanksgiving. So the first thing I'm going to do, we're going to go back in time to week 1. A little quick flashback, and then we're going to talk about the first 12 weeks of the contest. All the way back in week 1, we had Philadelphia, Denver, Arizona. Everybody was worried about who would win. Everybody won. That's been a theme for the most part for many weeks in the 2025 Circa contest. In fact, as we look over each week, there are only 3 weeks where one of the top 3 teams lost. But the weird thing is, in all 3 of those weeks, we had 2. So it's been feast or famine as we get into feast week, depending on your viewpoint as to whether everyone got through or whether there was a big elimination event. And so let's hit some of those key weeks. Week 5 was our first one. So this contest was humming along through the first 4 weeks with very few eliminations. The only team over 10% picked was the Green Bay Packers, losing on that last second field goal to Cleveland, but they were at 11%. So there wasn't any real big wipeouts. Well, week 5 came along. I'm going to pull up the popularity for week 5. That's the week the Rams steamed up on Thursday night with San Francisco's injuries. And we also had Arizona against Tennessee. Both the Rams, and how bad do you feel with the way the Rams have looked for the remainder of this season? They now look like probably the best team in football. The 8-point line is probably one you would want with the Rams at home against the Niners based on how they played in most games, but they shot themselves in the foot repeatedly, lost that game, and that was a surprise most popular pick. But the other team wasn't a surprise being popular, the Arizona Cardinals. And if we recall, that was one of the worst beats we've ever seen. So it took the Rams, the best team in football through the first 12 weeks of this season, losing a game at home that they gained a ton of yards but made a ton of mistakes in overtime, and Arizona losing one of the most improbable games you'll ever see, where they blew a big lead and had a series of comical events, including the dropped touchdown by Amari DiMercado, where he was going in the end zone and dropped it before and would have basically clinched the game. So that was the first week that really gave us a wipeout. Buffalo that week also among the top 5. So that particular week wiped out over half of the pool. Fast forward to week 8. Week 8 was our other one. Let's sort by popularity there. Week 8 was a week where we had one big favorite, the Colts, Colts were really popular. We're a 15-point favorite against the Titans. They won. But the next two choices, people were trying to get through with those lower future value teams in Atlanta versus Miami and Cincinnati versus the Jets. Over half the pool was on one of those two teams that week. They lost. And so that's going to come in when we talk about here how this contest is shaped up. That was a pretty big week with repercussions going forward. So that was one. And then the next one also was week 10. Week 10, when I'll sort by popularity here. People were running out of options. If you saved up, you probably have Buffalo, Seattle, or Denver. But then people had to come up with some choices. Carolina is only a 5-point favorite at home against the Saints. Got steamed up, coming off their upset win over the Packers the week before in a shocker. And 28% of the pool went out on them. Another 15% who had saved the Bills for that game against Miami lost as well. And so close to half the pool went out in week 10. Other than that, the chalk is one. The chalk is one. Those are your biggest upsets, and they came kind of clustered together. And so those results, plus all the various little elimination events, are why this pool is down to 900 entries entering Thanksgiving from originally over 18,000. So we are at under 5% of the pool, but still a pretty large number of 900. Now, I want to talk about these weeks and kind of how they set up with how things look now and how this contest looks. So if I were to do an overarching overview of this contest, and up to this point through the first 12 weeks, what I would say is it's been a week where chalk has mostly prevailed, but some of the low future value teams losing has really concentrated picks where a lot of entries have used a lot of the best teams in ways that maybe that wasn't the case in all prior years in this contest, certainly not last year. And so, yes, 900 entries are through, but those 900, a large chunk of them have used a lot of the best teams through 12 weeks with 12 picks. If we were to look at the most frequently used teams, the teams that are least available to people, the 12 teams least available. Well, among those, we have, I think the number is 7. I'm going to pull it up here. Well, there's 5 that are under 10% available. Indianapolis, Denver, New England, Seattle, and Green Bay, right? Then you add in Detroit, and you add in Buffalo. So that gets you up to 7. So there's 7 teams that are sub 20% available. So collectively, the average entry may have one of those teams on average. But most people have used those teams. And those are, for the most part, all those teams, as it turns out, even the teams that when the picks were made, maybe we didn't expect to be as good as they are, like Seattle, all those teams are quite valuable in this contest, and you'd love to have any of them. And then from there, you add in, the only low future value team, Arizona, who is only available at 30% of the pool. But that number could have been closer to 0, but for that Tennessee loss, right? And so even that loss took away some entries that were trying to save future value. The Atlanta loss, to Miami, the Cincinnati loss, and the Carolina loss were all attempts by people in the middle of this contest to save some future value, to save some good teams for later in the year, and they all failed. And so the net result is you're going to see a lot of risky picks, a lot of teams popping up at the end of this year, and entries that are down to it, that have used all those good teams, are really going to be stretched. As a way of illustrating this, I ran our optimal path tool, Pool Genius. I ran our optimal path tool. I'm gonna just pull it up here in our data grid. I will share this with you. I'm going to switch over to our optimal path. Don't worry about the order I'm going to put teams in, but I'm going to load in the most frequently used teams in this contest, just so we have them loaded in the past. New England, Seattle, Green Bay, and who else am I missing here? Arizona, and one more. Houston. Houston is they're on the fringe, but those are your 12 most commonly used teams. If you're going to substitute in one, the next tier does include San Francisco, who was just used somewhat heavily, Chicago, used across several weeks, Pittsburgh and the Chargers, who are coming up here in 13B. So these are these 12 I'm showing here that's the most common 12. That's not to say every entry obviously hasn't used them. A lot of entries though have used most of these teams. So when I run a quick optimal path survival on this entry, I just want to show you like where it starts to devolve. Look down at our survival. If you used all those good teams, and you're going to be on the really most popular teams if your goal is just survival, and then you're going to get to week 16. And this says your best choice might be the Saints against the Jets. And then you got a team on the road in Dallas at Washington on Christmas. And then you got the Bengals, probably with Joe Burrow. We're certainly thinking if he plays Thanksgiving, he'll still be around. But maybe the Bengals on week 17B. So I just wanted to show that to you. When we're talking about the long-term outlook of this contest, this represents the most common set of teams people have used, and the choices get really, really dicey over the final month of this year, or this contest, in this pool. And so I wanted you to be aware of that, because as we get into our discussion of Thanksgiving, week 13B, we're going to talk about like what's the long-term outlook of the contest. I know it looks like 900 and everybody's surviving, and they have so far. But the ones that are survived have used a lot of value. It is going to get risky. So I don't think we're looking at like a massive, it could happen. Like when I say massive, I'm talking 100 plus, right? It could happen, but you would need almost like a 6-team really popular favorites parlay that is extremely unlikely to hit. It could be like 10% to hit. So there's like a 10% chance, that we get it chopped out. But there's also the chance that we just need a couple weeks, just like week 5 and just like week 8. And those weeks are becoming a little more likely because you're going to get concentration on teams late in the year, including some risky teams. I'm going to pull up here for you a graphic. These are our projected most popular picks over the final stretch of this contest, starting with Thanksgiving week. So what this shows you, we've got Philadelphia there. You see the Chargers show up in week 13. You see Tampa in week 14. See Houston in week 16. You see Kansas City and Dallas, because those picks on Christmas, there's only 3 games to pick from, and they've got to go somewhere. There are no big favorites. So there's really a lot of risk there. And then if we get to 18, the team that projects to be most available, it also looks like they could be in the playoff hunt and like facing a matchup that they're likely to be playing is Jacksonville. And they could be heavily picked that week. And so, all it takes, are we going to hit a long parlay of all these teams winning? Yeah. But if you get a few of these teams to lose, this pool's dynamics are going to change drastically. And that starts this week with Thanksgiving. The chances that you get Baltimore, probably going to be over 30% picked on Thanksgiving. Philadelphia going to be heavily picked. We're going to break this down. But Philadelphia going to be heavily picked, and then the Chargers. The chances that all three of those, I guess, chalk popular teams hit a 3-game parlay is less than 50%. So there's a greater than 50% chance that one of those teams, at least one of those teams, gets chopped, and this pool dynamic changes greatly. So I'm going to give you my projection. I know a lot of people will probably say the way things have trended, I'm going to be too low, but I am raising my number on the number of winners, but I'm raising it to 19.5. I've gone up. I've been as low as 10.5, 12.5 in recent weeks, 14.5. Going up to 19.5 because we just had another, survival. The 49ers got through. We had a lot of big favorites, but last week was the expected high survival week. If we get through Thanksgiving and those three teams win, we hit that 3-team parlay, then this contest is going to be very chalky, and I will adjust upward again. But if one of them loses, that number's coming down because, we could get one of those events. So let's talk about Thanksgiving. So week 13A, or Thanksgiving, as we call it, has 4 matchups that we're going to want to talk about here. I'm going to pull up our data grid for you, and we're going to talk about this Thanksgiving week. Here are your 8 teams available to pick. We show their availability there. You've got Green Bay versus Detroit in the opening game. Only 8% of the pool has Green Bay, and they are an underdog, so we expect them to be the least popular pick and probably sub 0.5%. There might be a couple of picks that come in on them, but I would expect them to be the lowest pick team in this contest for a lot of reasons. The second least available is their opponent, Detroit, in that first game. So we're really going to get off to a slower start in Circa Survivor on Thanksgiving with the first game. It's the appetizer before we build into the key picks later in the day and on Friday. Only 18% have Detroit. They are the favorite. They are at home. So I expect that there will be some picks on Detroit, but not many. If you've got them and you've got other options, you're probably looking elsewhere. Though we're going to talk about game theory and why you might want to consider them here in a bit. Next game is the Chiefs and the Dallas Cowboys. Another spread around a field goal. Kansas City has been projected as a favorite all year. They are available to only 54%. So roughly almost half the pool has used them. That said, also on Christmas, they are a favorite at home against Denver, also in week 16 as a big favorite against the Titans and how it's shaping up. So this is one of those decisions where if you don't use the Chiefs here and you still have them, you can make that decision, defer until 16 late in the contest and decide on week 16 with 1 week to go how you're going to use them. And so I expect they won't be heavily used this week. And Dallas is the underdog. You might get a little bit of action on Dallas. We're going to talk about all these EVs there in a second, but you might get a little bit of action on Dallas. We don't expect a lot. The third game, though, is where it picks up the night game on Thanksgiving and into the Friday game. The night game is Baltimore, 7-point favorite at home against Cincinnati. Joe Burrow is expected to play. Baltimore's been heavily used. They are the third most heavily used team on this Thanksgiving set of games. That said, I think those that did not use them, we're saving them specifically for this spot. We have a projection of 31% out of 33% that have them available. So we basically expect smoke them if you got them type situation where close to 90% or so of the people that have Baltimore available will use them. They plan to use them this week, and they're going to do so. There might be some that have both Philadelphia that we're going to talk about in Chicago and Baltimore, and they may make a choice. I would tend to think that if you saved Baltimore off from last week, you're using them now, but we shall see. Opposite them, we've got Cincinnati. We expect, because it's a limited slate of games, some percent on the underdog here. Another high EV play. We're gonna get into all this EV math here in a second because you may be wondering why it is what it is. And then the final game, the game where We think over half the pool will land. You could have 60% of this contest checking in, not knowing if they're advancing as of Friday morning. We have the Eagles as a 7-point favorite over the Bears at home. I just bumped these numbers up slightly. I opened it at 55%. I'm bumping it to 57 as I think about it. And as I look at availability combos, I'm fairly confident you are not getting a number under 50% on the Eagles, just based on people saving them, based on who's available, and based on their status as being tied for the biggest favorite. I think you're going to get a very popular Eagles pick. And then you're going to get some people that go opposite that, a small number. And so we actually have about 2.5 to 3% coming in on the Bears. That would be somewhere between, let's say 18 and 25, 27 picks on this Bears team. It's kind of what we would expect. And so we'll see if that number gets close to there. So let's talk about this overall set of games and the game theory and strategy. I think in most cases, people are committed to who they're going to pick. However, there are plenty that do have some choice. You always have a choice. You might have settled on and decided between Kansas City or Baltimore or Philadelphia and only have one available, but they do have other choices. So we're going to talk through what we're seeing here with these teams and with this board. And here's one thing I want to highlight for you. I'm going to switch off this data grid real quick. You notice I've highlighted it here by projected EV. Chicago's number one, the underdog. Philadelphia's dead last. They're the only team with an EV under 1. Every other team on this board has an EV, sometimes significantly. That's one of the biggest EVs we've seen. That might be the biggest EV we've seen so far in this contest. Kansas City might be the second biggest. I had to look back. I'm going to check the Colts back in week 8. They were a 1.15 in actual results, for example. They would have been one of the highest. I don't know that anybody last week. 1.16 for Detroit last week, 1.12 for Baltimore. So we haven't really seen anybody get to 1.20. And yet on this Thanksgiving schedule, we see 2 of them with Detroit also close and another underdog, Cincinnati, also with a high EV. So let's talk about why that is and what's going on. I'm going to pull up an article I wrote earlier this year when we had our optimal path tool and people were asking questions. Why does your max survival path tell me Philadelphia on Thanksgiving, but your max EV path tell me Chicago, their opponent? That's a good question. But I laid out in the article, and I'm going to pull it up here. It's called Max Survival versus Max EV Paths, Why Underdogs Pop Up in Holiday Weeks. And if I were going to give you the Cliff Notes version, it's this. You normally wouldn't want to ever be on a dog in Survivor pools. There's 15 games to pick from. The picks don't get that concentrated. And if they do get concentrated, it's because a team like, Baltimore last week is a 2-touchdown favorite, right? Or, we might see a 40 to 50% number on the Rams back in 9, but they were a 2-touchdown favorite. So you're not going to see that kind of concentration on riskier picks. You're going to see it maybe on really big favorites. Well, what happens in the holiday weeks is picks are more constrained. Obviously, you have fewer options, and so you can get more concentration on relatively riskier picks. Because the Eagles wouldn't be drawing 57% in a normal week, right? As a touchdown favorite, they would not be. In our public pick data, for example, in all Survivor pools, not the Circa contest with its double pick week rule, but in all Survivor pools, the Eagles are only 8% this week. They're not like a super popular, like appealing pick for the masses, but because of this contest and because people want to take the best team they could save without being tempted to use. So KC, Detroit, Baltimore were far more used throughout the season. Had much more spots where they were bigger favorites. And so because of that, Philadelphia is Mr. Available, right? But Mr. Available among the bigger favorites. And so we see a concentration. So in this article I lay out, and I actually, this table I'm showing you, I'm going to tell you what this is, and I'll sort by it. This is a table of Thanksgiving picks in this contest from 2010 to 2024, with the pick percentage, the actual pick percentage, the spread, the win odds, and the EV, and the result. Did that team win or lose? So I'm going to sort for you by EV, and I just want you to take a look here. So here are the best EV plays, and I want you to notice something. The top 2 best EV plays in this contest up till this point were both underdogs. One of them won. Washington is a 2.5-point dog against Dallas. Washington was actually picked by 14% of the pool, and despite that, had a really great EV. And that's because 44% of the pool was picking a 2.5-point favorite, Dallas, who they've kind of committed to as a favorite. But as you recall, that year Dallas had some injuries. Washington won that game as a road dog. And so the high EV paid off. People that played Washington were heavily represented in the winners. The Detroit pick, also a field goal dog that year, did not win, but was a really high EV play. Similar philosophy to Washington. Detroit was opposite. Let me see if I can find their opponent here. They were opposite, I believe, Houston on Thanksgiving. Yes, Houston was a 3-point favorite. So Houston had a low EV because they were 37% picked. So that year you had 44 and 37. You had 80-something% of the pool on 2 basically field goal type favorites. And so it made a lot of sense to be off of. Other high EV plays, we see some favorites show up there that were relatively low owned, which is your ideal. But we also see more dogs. We see Las Vegas in 2021 as a touchdown dog. So a lot more similar to the 2 big dogs this week. That was the year Derek Carr and the Raiders were a touchdown dog at Dallas. Only 3% of the pool picked the Raiders. And that year, Dallas as a touchdown favorite. And this is pretty much going to give us the same scenario as what we're going to see with Philadelphia this year. 60% picked as a touchdown favorite with 74% win odds. And a 0.91 EV. What happened? The Raiders stunned them in overtime, knocked out a massive amount of the pool that was left, and the Raiders pickers were rewarded. So 2 of the 3 biggest EV plays have worked out for underdogs in this contest in its first 5 years. We had another dog that lost, New England, as a short dog in 2022, but another leverage spot. And we had Detroit as a really big dog as a slight positive EV play. So anyway, I say all that to say this. When you get concentrated on a team, the dog becomes viable. The dog opposite the really popular teams become viable because their relative win odds aren't as poor as what we tend to see in a normal week when the opponent to the really popular pick gets steamed up. They actually have a realistic 25% chance or so of winning. So much of the pool's on the other side. So I put a summary down here. I'm going to go through this summary. From 2020 to 2024, the most popular Thanksgiving team averaged 54.8% of all picks and a pretty low 0.92 EV. Their opponents averaged 4.1% of picks and 0.98 EV, with 3 of those 5 dogs posting a plus EV over 1. 3 of the underdogs opposite the most popular favorites won on Thanksgiving, and 4 of the top 10 EV holiday teams have been underdogs. And then I put this fun fact. So check out this article. In the first 5 years of Circa Survivor, 7 of the 79 entries that picked a Thanksgiving underdog went on to win Circa Survivor, 8.9%, versus 47 of 756 that picked a favorite, or 6.2%. And this is where I remind you, I'm doing this before we know whether that underdog won or lost. There were 79 picks in this contest over the first 5 years that have been made on a Thanksgiving underdog. So without knowing whether they won or lost, could have told you that 7 of those went on to win. And that was a higher rate than the people that picked the favorites. Now, I'm going to look at these numbers. I'm going to tell you right now, we have more people live on Thanksgiving this year than we do in the past 5 years of Thanksgiving and Circa Survivor combined. Some of that is a result of just how much this contest has grown, but certainly some of it is the chalky way this contest is broke and how people have used heavy future value teams, etc. So I'm going to go back to our data grid, but I wanted to reiterate here. There is game theory. There is game theory and a justification for picking an underdog opposite a really popular favorite. That would be Cincinnati or Chicago on Thanksgiving, when there are only 4 favorites to pick from, and when 88% of the pool could be on one of those 2 teams. Because here's what can happen. Here's those EVs again. Philadelphia is the worst EV. That's because if you pick Philadelphia and Philadelphia goes through, most of the pool goes through with you, right? There's some scenarios where Baltimore loses, but in a lot of scenarios where Philadelphia won and your pick advanced, you're not gaining much equity, and that was one of the chances this pool could get chopped, and it didn't happen. So you're heading toward a bigger pot split. Now, for a lot of you, that may be fine, but it's not gaining you that big swing. Picks on the dogs or staying off the dogs and off Philadelphia. Let's say you have Kansas City or Detroit available. Those are really high EVs for those 2 teams. And the reason they are high is because you can pick a favorite, sure, a riskier favorite, but one that keeps you clear of basically the traffic jam on the game. And if an upset does happen, you benefit while you were on a favorite elsewhere. And so you get both sides here with the Chicago-Cincinnati high EVs and the Kansas City-Detroit high EVs. Is you basically get, in one case, a direct pick against, where if your pick wins, if Chicago wins, what happens to this pool? If Chicago wins, this pool is down to, let's say, under 400 people. And it could be under 100 if Baltimore also loses, right? So if Philadelphia and Baltimore lose, we're talking, we go from 900 to like 80 people left in this contest. Then stuff gets real. The value of those entries just shot up 10x, right? 20x. And so those are when the people are making the pick on a Chicago or Cincinnati, that's what they're doing. They're saying, I can draft with 900 people and I can follow the crowd, or I can take a 25% shot that this contest gets clipped this week with a big upset, and I'm on it. And so that's a game theory. And so my thought would be, we've had this in our product all year. My projections on Philly have largely, if we check back each week in the product, have been similar. I think their win odds have dropped slightly. They might have been closer to 80 at the start of the year. And as they've kind of gone down the market slightly, nothing huge, and Chicago has continued to win and at least be closer to average, they've kind of hung, but they've never really moved that much. And we've always been projecting Philadelphia as popular. So all throughout the data, if you're using this product, everybody has their own personal opinion, but Philadelphia has always been the best probable pick to just survive, but the worst pick for EV reasons. The best pick to get through, the worst pick to maximize how much you win when you get through. And so that's the case even today. So those are the choices you have to make. They do have future value. They're really valuable on 15 if everybody uses them this week when they play the Raiders in a week that could also be tough. So if I had a choice between Baltimore and Philly, I'm probably taking the better EV play, and I'm saving Philly. The question comes in, when do you eat the chalk on like Kansas City, using Kansas City, Detroit now, versus if you still have them, saving those teams for Christmas? And I think it could go either way, right? It could go either way there. There's so many entries in play now that they're good EV plays at low ownership now, but they could also be good EV plays. So the question is, do you want to be on a Dallas or a Washington, depending on how that goes? But it looks like we're trending toward Dallas on Christmas. Or do you want to have Kansas City or Detroit to stay off that Dallas-Washington game? Or would you rather be on Philadelphia now and have those teams available then? That's really your choice. And so good luck as you weigh those options. We're going to now transition. I'm going to quickly hit week 13B and talk about, we obviously don't know how many of the 900 are going to get through, and that could change some of these availability numbers. But here are my projected popularity on week 13B. Chargers are tremendous chalk. I don't think I'm really going out on a limb here to say the Chargers are going to be really popular against the Raiders, especially the way the Raiders have looked recently. That line's at 9.5. They're going to be highly picked. They don't have much future value after this week. The schedule gets tougher. And a lot of these other teams just aren't available. And so they are high chalk. We project Jacksonville as the next, and then Miami. These, again, are teams that are mostly available. If you look in that availability projected column, 72% have the Chargers, 90% have Jacksonville, 98% have Miami. And then we see, like, in that next tier of teams, a bunch of teams that are largely used, like the Rams, Seattle, New England, Denver, and Indy, who aren't going to get much popularity because they simply can't. But that said, let's sort by EV. If you have them, we just saw those great EVs on Thanksgiving. Well, these are the best EVs we've seen otherwise as well. And these are on big favorites. So instead of having to take an underdog to get your 1.33 EV or a 3-point favorite to get your 1.22 EV, if you have Seattle or the Rams, you can get that EV on a 10.5-point favorite, right? So they're going to be really tempting to use as a fade of the Chargers. So far, these fades have not generally worked out, but you're still going to have another opportunity where close to half the pool is going to be on the team. So the other teams we talked about Miami, we talked about Jacksonville. There's a hierarchy there. Jacksonville has the highest future value of that group. They, to me, are the most likely save. Because of that, Miami has low future value and is a 6-point favorite. It's a risky pick, sure, relative to others. But at some point, all these entries have used really good teams. You're going to have to pick teams like Miami at some point. You do it now. You do it in week 16 when you might be tempted, or you might have to pick a New Orleans at home against the Jets, or Arizona at home against Atlanta if you still have them. You do it in 15, right? Pittsburgh versus Miami, similar odds. So do you do it in 17, which is a disgusting week, 17B? Cincinnati at home against Arizona, maybe if Burrow's doing okay. Pittsburgh at Cleveland. Tennessee versus New Orleans. These are the picks people might be down to because of availability by then. So at some point, you'd have to take that stand. When do you take it? I think that's what you're weighing with this week 13B, and whether you go with somebody like a Miami or you eat the popular chalk and go with the Chargers. So that's a breakdown of week 13B and the choices that are in front of you. Here's what I'd say overall. Like I said, I think I would set the over-under at 19.5, but that number could change drastically by next week. And it's going to change based on what happened with the Chargers, what happened with the Ravens, and what happened with the Eagles. There is, close to 50% that at least one of those teams lose. Will it happen? If it doesn't, this pool is trending toward really, really large number of checks being written by Circa for less than past winners recently have won. Because you got 100 people splitting 18 million. That's 180,000-ish, and versus 20 winners are getting close to 1 million. So this week is going to dictate a lot of that, because after this week there are opportunities for more losses and more concentration, but this will take 3 of those, probably a third of them, off the board. This is a big week for Circa in determining just how many checks get written, how many winners are around. Good luck as you weigh these decisions, as you weigh survival versus playing EV versus trying to be more unique from the crowd in case something happens. It's going to be a fascinating week to watch. It's going to be a wild Thursday night into Friday, and good luck.